Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Boozer here. Thanks for stopping by. So going along with what we've been talking about for Hydra, I want to touch upon the best buffs and debuffs you can bring for your Hydra team. So keep in mind that obviously this is roster dependent, and if you're just starting out in Hydra, you're not quite sure what you want to bring to make a proper team. I'm going to try to go over everything in this video. I got a tier list prepared for you guys, and then I'll try to talk about alternatives and suggestions on which champions to bring these types of buffs. And yeah, we'll have a good one in this video. So let's get right into it. All right, so I made one of these fancy tier list things. It's actually pretty fun. I love the presentation of this style. Like, you can get the tier list. It's just easy for people to look at. So let's go over the buffs and debuffs here. I didn't put all the buffs and debuffs in the game. For example, block passive skills, for example, that doesn't really apply to anything Hydra related. But I tried to put all the relevant buffs and debuffs here that will apply to the Hydra. Okay, guys? So let's start off here with ally protection. So ally protection obviously really protects your team. The damage incoming towards your team is reduced by 50%, and then some of that is redirected onto the caster of the ally protection. It's a big damage mitigator. However, it's not particularly critical, for example, for any Hydra team to have it. Also, the threat of it being stolen is quite high, because now that Hydra is protected by that ally protection. So we always have to consider how likely this buff will get stolen. So overall, it comes into the meh category. You don't need to bring it, but it's okay to have, but it's okay to not have. So no big deal there, right? Next, we have block buffs. So block buffs, as we all know, is one of the most important. It's a very easy must-have. It's one of the most important debuffs you can apply to, you can bring to your team. It applies to many of the heads. It weakens them or neutralizes them completely. So having block buffs is incredibly important. The problem with block buffs is that there's not many champions in the game with block buffs, especially AoE block buffs, and especially on a 3-turn cooldown or better. Having it on a 4-turn cooldown is actually not fast enough for it to be applied all the time. 3-turn cooldown might not even be fast enough either, depending on your gear. But 3-turn cooldown is the best we have in the game so far. Unless you have like Relentless, for example, you can cheat some turns there. But definitely bring block buffs to your Hydra team. So coming up next, we have block damage. So for example, somebody like Helicath, for example, will place block damage on your team. It protects your entire team from all incoming damage. Sounds great, right? Unfortunately, similar to how ally protection offers your team protection, it can also be stolen. So block buff damage buff can also be stolen by the head of mischief. And if applied, it's actually significantly worse than ally protection, because block buffs basically completely negates all damage incoming to the Hydras. And I mean, as a stolen buff, it's incredibly difficult to recover from. It's also not significantly necessary to bring this to protect your team. It doesn't increase damage or anything. It just literally blocks incoming damage. So for me, it's a never bring. I never bring this buff. I understand if you have very poor survivability, or if you have basically just like a Helicath, for example, and then nothing else, sure, bring the Helicath. But I would advise to try to not bring this buff if possible. Moving on, we have the we have the block debuffs buff. So this will protect your team from, say, the Head of Blight, which applies poison to you. It won't protect you from the Head of Torment, which has an irresistible fear. It will protect you from the Provoke from the Head of Wrath, for example. So there is some good uses of block debuffs. However, I find that it's actually not significantly necessary. It's a good buff to have. It definitely has good uses, and it's better. You're better off with it than without. However, it's a very strong buff to be stolen as well. So we have to consider how strong this buff is when it's stolen and how bad it can be for us. So truthfully, most of my teams actually don't use block debuffs, and I don't really fear not having it. So for me, it's really a meh kind of buff. It's good to have, not necessarily vital or anything like that. You can live without it, but it's not necessarily bad to have as well. Keep in mind that if it gets stolen and spread across all the Hydras, it really messes up your flow of your team. You'll notice that a lot of debuffs are very important against the Hydra, so not being able to apply those debuffs will really hurt you. Okay, so moving on, we have the continuous heal buff. Continuous heal is actually okay, gives you a little bit of survivability. Again, the problem is if it's stolen, healing up the Hydras, a percentage of the Hydra's health is obviously much larger than your champion's health pool. So having it stolen is significantly bad. Healing up the heads are bad. However, mostly not game breaking. Like for example block damage, but it is pretty bad. So we're going to put it here as not needed. It's not necessarily bad, but it's definitely not needed. Having ways to heal up your team is a good thing, but having it stolen and healing up the big fat Hydra heads is not good at all. Okay, so we're going to put it there as not needed. After that, we have the counterattack buff. This one is really bad. Don't bring this, because if it gets applied and stolen and then reapplied to the whole Hydra team, it's basically lights out. It's really hard to recover from that once all the Hydra heads have the counterattack on them, and then they start attacking you with their A1s, which are in some cases ridiculously strong, like the Head of Blight, for example, laying out poisons all over you, or the Head of Wrath, which just wipes you out with just their basic skills. So never bring this counterattack, for example, like Valkyrie and stuff like that. Even somebody like Nut, which is actually a really good champion with his triple hit max HP slams, having the counterattack on his A2 and having it stolen would end runs often. So definitely be careful when bringing this buff. Definitely don't bring this buff if you can help it. Moving on, we have the decrease accuracy. So actually decrease accuracy, I would place it in good. Decrease accuracy is actually a really good debuff to land on the Hydras. When the Hydras cannot lay debuffs on your team, it makes your team significantly stronger. You don't have to worry about heal reduction from the Head of Decay, stopping your champion from healing. You don't have to worry about provokes from the Head of Wrath. You don't have to worry about all that stuff. It's actually really, really good. And it's actually kind of underappreciated. There's not too many champions with decreased accuracy that are kind of good in other ways. So you don't want to bring a champion just for decreased accuracy. But if you have it, it's actually a really good debuff to have. So I'm going to put it in the good category. After that, we have the decrease attack debuff. So this reduces attack by 50%, and I'm going to place it in the good category. And the reason why is because it's pretty vital to have decreased attack against the Head of Wrath. Of course, decreased attack will help reduce the incoming damage from all the heads, but it's mainly more critical against the Head of Wrath because the Head of Wrath hits so hard. So having it here is very good. Definitely bring it if you can. I would put it in the good category. However, it's not a must-have. If you have good enough gear, you can actually mitigate the Head of Wrath's damage enough that you don't need to bring decreased attack. So I'm not going to say it's a must-have, but it's definitely a good debuff to bring. Moving on, we have the decrease crit damage debuff. So yes, the Hydra heads do deal crit damage, but they don't actually bring that much crit damage to the fight. So having decreased crit damage is not going to be needed to reduce the damage from the Hydras. The best one to decrease the damage from the Hydras is either to buff yourself up with mitigating buffs or to debuff them with decreased attack. So I'm going to put decreased crit damage here as not needed. In that same vein, we have decreased crit rate. I'm going to put that there as well. The Hydras don't have high crit rate. I believe it's only 15%. So decreasing it even further really doesn't offer too much more benefit. So I'm going to put it here as not needed. After that, we have decreased defense. So I'm going to put decreased defense as a must-have. So this is one way that allows your team to deal more damage to the Hydra heads. It's a very good debuff that just applies and works on all the heads. Obviously, having decreased defense on the head of Wrath gives you the most benefit because the head of Suffering, the tanky head, has the most benefit because the head of Suffering has super high defense. But bringing decreased defense as a must-have debuff will make your team deal more damage. Your War Masters will deal more damage, for example. So definitely a must-have debuff to bring. After that, we have decreased resistance. Decreased resistance is similar to increased accuracy. It basically lowers your gear requirement. So decreased resistance means you can bring less accuracy. I would say it's definitely not needed because most people would gear their team with proper accuracy so that they can land their proper debuffs. Having to land decreased resistance also requires you to have decent accuracy in the first place. So whoever is applying the decreased resistance needs to have good accuracy. It just feels like it doesn't really make sense to bring decreased resistance, and it's not going to be a huge benefit to your team because you're already applying the debuffs. Why do you need to decrease the resistance even further? Because there's an innate 3% chance that you will fail applying your debuffs. So even if you had 1000 accuracy against their resistance and their resistance is further decreased, you still only have a maximum of 97% chance to land your debuff. And there's always a 3% chance that the Hydra will resist your debuff. So it's definitely not a necessary buff at all, a debuff at all. So don't even bother bringing this one. I wouldn't say it's a not bring, don't bring ever, but it's not needed at all. Okay. So moving on, we have the decreased speed debuff. This one is a definite must-have. So decreased speed makes the Hydras slower. They take their turns less, and you take more turns against them. So by doing that, you have more rotations of your skills, you deal more damage, you recover faster because you have turns to heal, and of course go back to your skills. It's incredibly important, guys. Unfortunately, there's actually not that many champions with decreased speed if you actually look around, or good ones anyways. So make sure you at least have one champion that can have decreased speed, ideally on an AoE, ideally on an A1. I know it's a tall ask. There's not many champions that can do it. Chris can do it. Chris is insane. Mother Cybele has a really good A1 decreased speed, AoE. Nia has a really good A1 decreased speed as well. And if you guys are really hurting for decreased speed, you guys have Visix to help you guys. It is on a 3-turn cooldown for Visix, but Visix can come in and she's on day 270. Free login champion. She can help you guys provide some decreased speed. Okay, guys, 100% needed. It's a must. It gives your team much more damage, much more survivability. Your team will do much smoother runs, to be honest, with decreased speed on the team. Okay, guys. So after that, we have heal reduction. Heal reduction is Hydra doesn't really heal unless they steal the heal from you. They can, I believe, heal up from the shield. I don't think that's an actual heal though, so I don't know if heal reduction would actually stop that. So I'm going to put it as a not need. It's definitely not need, and it's definitely not something you would even care about in the Maya column. It's just so few cases where you actually bring this and it's actually useful. I wouldn't say it's a don't bring because there's no real significant negative for it. I guess it takes up 1 debuff bar spot. Just remember, guys, all bosses have 10 debuff bar spots. So you can't put like 100 debuffs on them. They max out at 10, if you guys didn't know that. So that would be the one negative against it. But there's very few niche case uses for heal reduction. Let me know in the comments below. I mean, if you guys have some other ideas on how to use some of these buffs and debuffs. But as far as I know, there's not too many uses for heal reduction right now. So moving on, we got the increase accuracy buff. So increase accuracy, it allows you to basically bring less accuracy, or it might allow a champion that you don't have accuracy on now to provide debuffs due to having increased accuracies. For example, sometimes I bring my Harima into my Hydra teams, and with increased accuracy, she can land the Provoke. Otherwise, she wouldn't have enough accuracy to land Provoke on like higher difficulty Hydras, for example. So I like the increased accuracy. I'm going to place it in the good. It's definitely not a must-have, but having it on your team will enhance certain champions to allow them to place debuffs that they otherwise would not. Another example would be Sun Wukong. If you build him out as a full-on damage dealer for Arena, you might not have that much accuracy on them, but with the increased accuracy buff, it might give them enough accuracy to actually land their strips and place their block buffs ability. So just an example there. Coming up here, we got the increase attack buff. So increased attack is going to be really boosting your damage here, especially if you're a damage dealer. So I'm going to put it right here in the good category. I find that increased attack isn't necessarily a must-have. I mean, it's going to be a must-have in like teams with full attacking damage dealers. It's, you know, if you don't bring it, you're not going to deal as much damage, right? But it's not like if you don't bring it, your team's going to fall apart. So that's why I'm going to put it in the good category here. It's not a must-have, but it's definitely a nice to have, and it's definitely going to help your team do more damage if you have this buff. All right, so coming back in here, we got the increased crit damage buff. Crit damage is going to, you know, boost up some of your damage dealers to do more damage. However, it's definitely not needed again. In this case, I'm going to put it as a meh. It is meh. It's going to do less damage usually than increase attack, for example, or increase defense for your defense-based damage dealers. It's a nice to have, but it's definitely not something that I would look out for. Increased crit rate. Most of your damage dealers will be 100% crit rate. So I'm going to put this increased crit rate in the not needed category. Having extra crit rate on your support champions for them to deal more damage, I mean, sure, but I mean, you could put it in the meh, but I'm going to say it's totally not needed. And usually these ones come together anyways, but I'm going to say it's totally not needed for your team. Okay, so coming in here, we got the increased defense. I'm going to put that in the same category as the increased attack. So this applies to damage dealers as well. So you got defense-based damage dealers doing more damage with increased defense. However, increased defense also gives your team more survivability. I wouldn't say it's a must-have because you can, like I said, you can mitigate some damage just by outgearing the Hydras, so you don't necessarily need it. You can also protect your team with like healing. Healing, for example, would give your team a little bit more survivability, so they don't necessarily need increased defense. But increased defense is definitely a good, at least, category buff here. Moving on, so we have Leech. Honestly, Leech, I'm going to say it's a must-have. I think Leech, unless your team's fully in regen, or you have a team that has incredible protection and healing all in one, then you don't need Leech. But I think even then, it's going to be hard to find a team comp that is able to do that. So I would say try to bring Leech. If you don't bring Leech, you're going to need ways to revive, heal, protect, shield. For example, keep your team alive otherwise. But I think Leech is very essential for any champion to try to recover some health in Hydra. Next, we have the poison debuff. For the most part, poison is kind of like a meh debuff. It deals some extra damage, but I think half the heads are immune to poison, and poisons deal reduced damage. So it's not going to be a significant amount of damage. It's kind of meh. You don't really need it. It's okay to have just for a little bit extra damage, but it's not significantly exciting or anything like that. After that, we have Provoke. Provoke's going to be in a must-have. If you don't have Provoke, it's really hard to deal with the Head of Decay, and we know that the Head of Decay definitely takes over. It takes over the run if you let it loose. So definitely you put Provoke up here. You can either use like a Provoke set or have champions that land Provokes. Ideally under A1s or multiple Provokers with their with 3-turn cooldowns, for example, can keep it under control. After that, we have shields. Shields are going to be a good buff to keep your team alive. Obviously, they don't damage your health, so you don't have to heal back. So they're going to be a good way to mitigate some damage and protect your team. After that, we have strengthen. Similar idea here. I'm going to put it in the good. These are all very good buffs. Keeps your team alive. I think strengthen. I think defense, increased defense is slightly more damage mitigation than 25% strengthen. But both are pretty close in terms of overall mitigation. Veil, I'm going to say Veil is either meh or good. You don't necessarily need to bring Veil to deal with the Head of Torment. So you could bring, like I said, Shamail, or you can bring a way to remove the debuffs like Tuhanarak, which passively removes it. But I think for most people, Veil would be considered a good buff. So I'm going to put the Veil here. After that, we have the Weaken. Weaken is going to be less damage producing, I guess, than decreased defense. So I'm going to put it in the meh. There are some good Weaken champions, for example, Geomancer that has a good kit along with Weaken, or obviously Lydia that provides decreased defense and Weaken. But just bringing a Weaken champion just to apply Weaken, I think is not really worth it. So I'm going to put it in the meh category as a nice to have, but not really necessary type of debuff. And then last, after that, we have Hex. Hex is 100% must have. Hex deals with the Head of Mischief, which is the Steel Head. If you don't have Hex on the Head of Mischief, you can't target it. And if the Head of Mischief eats one of your champions, then you're done, right? Unless you get super lucky. Hex also applies damage across the entire team. It deals a ton of damage. If you guys ever have a Hex champion and then you guys see that Hex champion suddenly deals an insane amount of damage, it's like, how did this support champion with Hex deal so much damage? Well, that Hex is spreading the damage that is applied from your other champions onto all the heads. So Hex is a huge damage boost. It's a way to deal with mischief, and it's a definite must bring. If you guys don't have Hex champion, I mean, the free one would be Mithrala. If you guys don't have her, try to put together a Curse set. Curse comes from Ice Golem, and try to make it work. Otherwise, you're missing out on quite a bit of damage, and you're missing out on a reliable way of dealing with the Head of Mischief in terms of targeting. Next, we have HP Burn. I'm going to put HP Burn here as good. HP Burn kind of suffers the same as Poison in that it doesn't deal as much damage to the Hydras. However, it can be applied to all the Hydras. It does kind of check the Head of Blight slightly. So there are some added benefits from HP Burn compared to Poison. So I definitely prefer HP Burn over Poison. And HP Burn deals more damage than Poison anyways. So I'm going to put it in the good category here. Afterwards, we have the increased resistance. So increased resistance, similar to how we were talking about for decreased accuracy, is good because it basically protects your team from getting debuffed, for example. However, there are some champions that you will bring that have very low resistance that you are bringing in. So for example, if your champion has no base resistance, you have Max Great Hall, for example, it only has 80 resistance. So bringing in increased resistance, you're only going to buff up that champion by 40 resistance, which is not going to make a difference because the Hydras will have more than enough accuracy to still debuff that champion. So I'm going to put increased resistance here below decreased accuracy. They both aim to achieve the same thing, but increased resistance is achieving that in a worse way. It's a meh buff. It can be good, but I'm going to say it's meh. It's also might actually be not needed, to be honest, because it only will be good for certain champions with certain builds. I'm going to leave actually in not needed at all. After that, we have increased speed. Increased speed, must have, guys. Similar idea as decreased speed. Increased speed gives you more turns, more damage, more survivability, more everything. Try to bring increased speed if you got it. There's actually not that many champions, but more than decreased speed. So for example, Lydia has it on her A3. Great. Uko has it on his revive. Even a 4-turn increased speed as a backup, very good. Okay, guys, so make sure you guys bring a team increased speed champion. That's going to help you guys do more damage, recover, have more consistent runs. After that, we have this taunt buff. I'm going to put it in the meh. I don't fully understand this, but I think if you have a champion with taunt, the Hydra will only attack it with its default skill, and it actually bypasses, actually protects your champion, your team champion that is being targeted to be eaten. So a champion that is supposed to be eaten will not be eaten if it's basically protected by a champion with taunt. It's actually an interesting interaction. There is speed tune teams with, for example, Emic that utilize this kind of idea. I'm not too familiar with it, so I'm not going to deep dive into that or anything like that. But for me, it's definitely not something you should bring, but I can see it being extremely critical for those speed tune teams. So I'm going to level with myself and just put it in the meh category for now. Lastly, we have the unkillable buff. I'm going to put it here as a don't bring this, because if you put unkillable on a champion, it gets stolen. Now those Hydras become infinitely more difficult to deal with. I wouldn't bother with this this buff or debuff, but you know, it can be worse because at least the Hydras still take damage, so it might actually be not needed as opposed to don't bring, but I would consider this better option than block damage or this, so maybe it belongs here as not needed. Okay, guys. All right, guys, so a little bit of a longer video. Hopefully you guys got some info from this that helps you guys out in terms of making your teams, in terms of piecing together the champions from your roster to make proper teams. Try to follow this guide. I think it's pretty solid. I think I've covered the must-haves and the goods pretty well, and I've tried to explain it to the best of my ability in this video. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. If you guys have other ideas, or if you guys find my placement a little bit off, let me know. Love to hear from you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.